And
we should really update this template, like today.
It's a lifetime present.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start. Thank you very much for coming to the God's Final for Semester 1. In order, speaking for the affirmative, we have April Broadbent, and Douglas Roche. For the negative, in order, we have Mork Kerrod, Giles, and Duggan. The topic for tonight is that businesses should be allowed to select job candidates primarily on the basis of physical appearance, if it is likely to substantially increase their profit.
Oh, no applause for the motion. Oh.
Thanks, Giles. With that in mind, we'd like to call April to begin her speech.
Let's hear intro.
Up and down the road you smile.
We got a show for you.
Bring the pain, April.
Huh?
Bring the
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
Here's the game.
Checking the games. Who is the speaker? Is it a Mr. or another word?
Mr.
It's
Johnny
Cook.
is in the centre.
Nice and non.
And we wouldn't want to penalise you.
Oh, right, that was.
Understandable mistake.
Mr. Speaker, we think the business world naturally survives on capitalism. We think that the business world is one of risk, of one where strong businesses live and where weak businesses die.
Yeah.
We think that the business world is one where there is no one to pick you up when you fail, that you are responsible for ensuring that your business survives, and where if you make a mistake or you don't make your choices in the best interest of your business dies, and that is the nature of the business world. We see direct competitors want your business to die. So this is the world that this model is talking about. So considering this context, we have three principles that you'll see occurring throughout our case study. So firstly, we believe that businesses have the fundamental right to choose who their team is to run their business. Secondly, we think that it is perfectly legitimate to discriminate based on factors that can adversely affect the business, such as in terms of profit or in terms of their public image. And thirdly, we think that unattractive people suffer under a system where discrimination based on appearance occurs anyway, but it occurs secretly and hidden from general knowledge.
Point of information.
No, thank you. So what are we talking about tonight? We think that all jobs can be generally categorized into one of three categories. So firstly, industries where appearance is obviously important. So for example, modeling, where that is the point. And secondly, where acting, where you have to look a certain way to portray a certain character or portray a certain idea. The second type of job is this intermediate category, where it might not be obvious to the average person, but the appearance of someone in this industry directly affects profits. So what are we talking about with that? We're talking about news presenters, we're talking about sales and marketing representatives, we're talking about retail, talking about industries where you're presenting an image to the public, trying to present a positive view to the general public, to make your business look good, to present a positive image for your business. And then we thirdly have these industries where it doesn't matter what you look like or anything like that. So for example, IT and hospitality. So furthermore on this, we don't think that under our model, many people would take up on this ability to be able to discriminate. We think that most employees would probably still see that there are other key performance indicators when selecting for a job. But we think that where there are employees that want to be able to make this choice, they should be able to make this choice. We think it's not right for businesses to be punished in terms of their profits and the success of their business for making choices that are in the best interest of their business. We think that under the status quo, employees already control so much of their employees' appearance. We think that they control things like uniform, whether or not their employees are allowed to wear piercing, making them cover up tattoos, telling them what kind of makeup they have to wear to their job. We think that this is just a natural extension by allowing employees to discriminate at the hiring process. So onto my substantive. I have 2 points of substantive tonight. Firstly, why businesses have a fundamental right to choose their employees, to choose what terms in which they employ people. And secondly, why this is important in the context of attractiveness. So firstly, on this fundamental right of choice, we think, so 2 points on this. Firstly, businesses must fight to survive capitalism. So going back to this idea of capitalism where it's like, you know, neck and neck, where you have to fight to get every advantage that your business possibly can. We think that, therefore, under this context, businesses have a fundamental imperative to be able to control their choice for the people who make up their team to make their business sustainable and effective. No, thank you. So when do we curtail this right to choose? We think that, as I've already said, we already allow discrimination all of the time for various characteristics. And we allow discrimination for characteristics that are physical and that can't be changed. For example, employees will base their choices on GPA, for example, when we see that it's like scientifically proven that intelligence is something that isn't that you are born with like a certain level of, and that if you are a naturally like unintelligent person, you can't like become an intelligent person. You're born that way. So we think that those sorts of things. We think that like in terms of more physical expressions of characteristics, we have industries where physical aptitude is vital for the execution of that job. We allow discrimination all the time. So we're talking about people that have eyesight impediments but can't become pilots. We're talking about how people that have diabetes can't become emergency services officers for the ambulance. We're talking about how police officers can't have asthma if they want to be on the force. So where do we limit this right of choice? We limit this right of choice for characteristics such that can be changed and that don't otherwise affect the ability of the job. So for example, religion. We do not allow businesses to make choices of employment based on the potential employee's religion, because firstly, it's a choice that person opts into, and secondly, we think that it can, businesses can work around it. So for example, if someone has to go to church at a certain time, you can make accommodations for that, so they can still do the job. So we don't allow that kind of discrimination. So this brings me on to my second point of substantive. Why is this freedom of choice, and why is this important into the idea of attractiveness in a job? We think that studies have shown that attractiveness is a significant factor in the way other people treat you. So we see that if you're more attractive, someone is more likely to stop if you're your car's broken down the side of the road and help you. We see that in a commercial setting, people are more likely to buy a product, say a beauty product, from someone that is more attractive because of that image. Sure.
So you agree that by not hiring people who you don't find unattractive, that they're actually going to think that they're less attractive because of it?
That was very convoluted. I'm not quite sure what you were going with there. But if you're saying, I don't know. Any double negatives? Right, so I'm going to continue on. So, psychological research has shown that, by things like social influence and bystander studies, people act differently around more attractive people. So we find that also, while beauty is it's obviously a subjective thing, there are some basic tenets that studies have found that most people generally find attractive, characteristics based on things like, their thinness, their haircut, their height, things like that, generally speaking. So this brings me on to the second idea. So when a business can identify these things, when it is scientifically and commercially proven that these factors do have an influence in the way other people treat that person, and that thus the way that person will be received while conducting their business, when we see that there are basic ideas of what generally makes an attractive person. So when businesses can identify these sorts of things, and they know that if they hire an unattractive person that will actively harm their business, they should absolutely have the right to be able to make that discretion. We see that people are less likely to buy a product or service from an unattractive person. So at the point at which all these things come across, we think that businesses should have the right to do so. So on the because businesses have a right to choice, and because it will detriment the free market if we allow this discrimination to continue, we are proud to propose.
like to thank April for her speech and call on Ida to begin the case for the negative.
Signing off.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, it says a lot about our opposition here when the first thing they do when asked to give an example of when people are being discriminated in the workforce is a pilot's eyesight. Mr. Speaker, there is a massive freaking difference between the eyesight of someone who has to be responsible for hundreds of lives as opposed to the girl who greets me at the cafe I walk into to buy my coffee every morning. Now, I have 2 points of rebuttal before I move on to my substantive tonight. First of all, no. This discrimination will not be limited to the industries they have spoken about. It will not be limited to fashion. It will be everywhere. Second point, what is pretty and how do we change the conception of pretty? And thirdly, how on earth would a business fail because the employees are not attractive enough? Now, first of all, as I've said, this policy would not be limited just to these first 2 categories that April mentioned. You will see it everywhere we have to interact with someone who is an employee of said company. You will see it at the hotel receptionist. You'll see it in the cafes. You'll see it in the bars. Everywhere I have to speak to a representative of that company. It will not be limited to fashion, Mr. Speaker. Now, secondly, what is pretty and how do we change it? Under the status quo, where we are allowed to sort of, even if it be a biased image that we present, we recognize that there are different ways to conceive whether someone is pretty or not. We believe that their policy is likely to change this and that our conception of pretty will never ever change if we are only ever presented with like a slim blonde woman who's in her like late 20s, possibly early 30s. Now, my third point, namely, I would ask our opposition here to give me one single example of when a company has failed because their employees have not been attractive enough.
For information.
Oh, yes, go on.
So Qantas are renowned for having like old and ugly flight attendants. Don't you think that their profits really like show this?
I think you've been on very different flights than I have. Okay, I'm actually going to move on to my points of substantive because they are quite big. Namely, the first one will naturally concern discrimination. And my second point will be why their policy would be bad for business. First of all, we say that their policy would be a step backwards in the endless struggle against discrimination of minorities that we have fought for so many decades. First of all, minorities are less likely to be considered attractive because our concept of beauty is a very Western one. Like I've said before, it's a blonde young woman who's very slim. It's not, your indigenous or Aboriginal average employee. It's not your average black woman. It's not your average, Chinese person. It's a very, very limited picture that we have of beauty. And, they mentioned that, religion won't be allowed to be a factor in this. Mr. Speaker, sorry. Religion very often affects the way you dress and the way you look. For example, a Sikh wears a turban for religious reasons. Now, there's not a whole lot of people who consider a turban the most attractive look ever. And again, like I said, if you open it, if you allow, no thank you actually, if you allow people to discriminate based on the, appearance of the person applying for this job, it will be very easy for the employer to say, oh, well, you weren't just, good looking enough, when it's actually about their skin color, when it's about their accent, God knows I've had that, when it's about, their religion as it's obvious from the person wearing a cross or wearing a Star of David. Now, the thing is, as I've said, progressive work has been done in the field. We're now seeing mannequins in more sizes than, absolute zero. And we also see that, what we say about this is actually that one of the very few industries that could possibly benefit from their model is that of plastic surgery. Now, the thing is, as we've said, for women, we've gone from focusing on, the very, very sexy secretary that we see in Mad Men, because that was, a period of the 50s. And while she may be attractive, it's not what we focus on today. Instead, we're focusing on talent, which we've been able to see by leading politicians such as Condoleezza Rice or Hillary Clinton, or whether you consider her successful or not, Julia Gillard. Now, my second point today is going to be why their policy would be absolutely detrimental to businesses. First of all, we do not believe that this would actually lead to any profit at all. And even if it actually does, it will only be in the short term. Now, while I may, decide to pick one cafe or the other because the girl serving me will be slightly more attractive at this one place, Mr. Speaker, if she spills, my coffee on me, I'm not going to go back to that cafe no matter how attractive she is. I'm going to go for the other one, where I might get a more skillful employee who's not as attractive to look at because I'm not going to interact with her and I'm not going to get burned. April.
Well, by your own characterization, do you not accept that, having a good public image is what people gets people in the door, like advertisement, and then the quality of the service is what keeps people to stay?
I'm going to speak on that soon, but I do not be. While we do believe that there is some, point of attractiveness in advertising, we do not believe that's what makes customers stay. It might bring them there in the first place, but it will not make them stay loyal to that company. So, why is it bad for business and reputation? And here comes in the point that April asked me. The thing is, people see through this all the time. Most of the people, most of your customers are not that blind as to not notice what you're doing. Look at American Apparel, where the leader of the company has come out and said that he only wants beautiful and slim people to wear his clothing. He is getting bashed all over the internet, and rightly so, no thank you. And, they only hire people with a certain look. I have friends who work there, and they are some of my most attractive friends. However, they might not necessarily be the best friends I have who are currently in retail. Now, let's look at what happens when a company actually points out, these flawed ideals of beauty that we have. Two of the most successful campaigns lately have been run by a company called Dove that are in the beauty industry. They've featured ads, displaying real women, as they call them, women of different sizes, shapes, and everything. And they've also had, ads about how we view ourselves as compared to how others view us. Mr. Speaker, we believe that this campaign has been the absolutely best thing for Dove in decades, perhaps possibly even better than their products. So because discrimination is something that we have fought, against for a very long time, and because we don't want to take a step back, and because taking this step backwards could actually be very harmful to the businesses, we are very proud to oppose.
Oh yeah.
Thank Ida for a speech and call on Pete Sams to continue the case.
Oh, you didn't break it down with the melody?
He's not ready to go.
Nice one. Doesn't bounce as well as a ball. He easy does it. Mr. Speaker, in 2001, Ansett Airline crashes in Australia, leaving Qantas an 87% market share on domestic airline flights. The reason I'm not paying $2,000 for my upcoming flight to Perth is because a new empire entered the market, Virgin Airlines. Virgin came in with their image of being young, fit, hip, energetic, which was primarily advertised through the people that they selected. We think it's a crying shame that then in 2007 they later get fined for discrimination on the basis of physical appearance. We think that fundamentally Virgin Airlines has performed a service to the Australian public by creating competition within the market for airlines, Mr. Speaker. Don't laugh, it's good. What we say is the fact is that if we didn't have the business with the ability to break into that market, to use whatever marketing techniques were at their disposal, that business would have failed against that sort of 87% monopoly, Mr. Speaker. We think that fundamentally businesses have the right to pick the people that are going to deliver success. We're proud to stand. A couple of points in rebuttal. First of all, we heard from Ida this idea that there's no such thing as physical attractiveness and that it's all subjective, so we can't have this thing. A few responses. We say, first of all, physical attractiveness, whilst beauty is in the eye of the beholder, there are some general characteristics which can objectively be seen to be beautiful. We think things like thinness, things like height, things like muscle tone and those sorts of things, things like symmetry of the face have all been identified that the vast majority of people would say is more attractive than less attractive. And to the extent that there are like other cultures or other groups or other industries where different things are admired, like in the weightlifting industry or like in another country, say in Tonga, where like obese people are considered physically attractive, Mr. Speaker, then we're happy for businesses to have their own metric about what they consider to be physically attractive or not, because they recognise that in their market, something can be seen to deliver a benefit to their profit lines, Mr. Speaker. What we say is like, secondly, even if it is subjective, so what? If they pick the wrong people, they suffer. That's capitalism, Mr. Speaker. But we think what's fundamental is that like they get that choice in the first place, Mr. Speaker. Second issue in rebuttal. We heard from Ida that this is taking a step backwards in terms of discrimination. Basically, her point ran like this. Minorities are ugly and therefore people won't hire them and therefore it's discrimination against minorities. A few responses. What we say first of all is minorities are hot, especially the French. But secondly, what we say is like, looks do matter in those businesses, and we say that like to the same extent that like having a minority person who like can't speak English because they've just come from another country where English isn't spoken, detriments that ability of the business in order to turn that person into a productive person. Businesses are allowed to discriminate on that particular basis. It's not discriminating on the basis that they are a minority, Mr. Speaker. It's discriminating on the basis that they can't be effective at doing the job, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we're happy to stand for. Then what we heard from Ida is this, like, it's actually secretly religious discrimination. Because like certain religions are required to dress or look a certain way. What we say is like, first of all, we don't think that there is that intrinsic ability of religion. April already dealt with that. But what we say is like, to the extent that looks do matter, and to the extent that like already under the status quo we think people get overlooked all the time for the way they look and the way they dress, Mr. Speaker. And to the extent that there are lots of jobs which require you not to wear certain things and to wear certain things on those jobs, where discrimination already does take place, Mr. Speaker, we're happy to stand for that. Then we heard from Ida that this is going to be bad for business, just because, lols, dove. So what we say is like, first of all, each business is different. So we don't think like physical appearance and physical attractiveness can mean different things in certain situations. So we say like when Facebook gets Mark Zuckerberg up and all over the media, Facebook benefits from having like this nerdy, scrawny looking kid running the company because people recognize that, hey, this guy's like a really good computer IT nerd. What I associate with being an IT nerd, my Facebook account is not going to get hacked by other IT nerds. But what we say is like other industries, say like, what we say is like, there are some industries where yes, physical attractiveness is just a direct correlation in terms of beauty. Ida herself admitted that she would go and buy coffee from someone who is more attractive than someone who is less attractive, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that someone who is more attractive doesn't actually burn her coffee. We think that like the business that picks the more attractive person therefore gets Ida's custom, assuming that they're not a complete inept person who's going to spill the coffee all the time, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. What we say is like, thirdly, like, in response to this, it's the businesses who choose to be ethical because they see this as a law, who suffer under this model. It's the business that goes, I'm happy to hire the hot chick, gets all the benefit under the status quo, whereas the business that goes, oh, I think discrimination is a bit of an issue, is the business that's going to suffer and ultimately die under the status quo, Mr. Speaker. We oppose that. Then what she told us is like, well, this is good because look at companies like Dove, which have changed their image. I'm not exactly sure how successful Dove's campaign has been, so 2 items. First of all, if it was successful, great for Dove. So, fantastic. We think more businesses will follow suit. We don't have a problem with that. If it failed, shit for Dove. It was a terrible idea. Don't do it again. Either way, our model is better because our model creates the choice for businesses to do what is going to be the most successful for their business.
Point of information.
Yes.
Now, Pete, we've mentioned flight attendants quite a few times. Can you explain to me why I, as a customer, would be harmed by walking into an airplane and saying, holy fuck, I'm more attractive than all of these supposedly hot flight attendants?
Have you seen flight attendants? Anyway. But first of all, like, it creates an image because everyone has this idea that when they go to Virgin, they'll be served by someone more attractive. So it's not even just the person in the ad, it's the person who like sells you the tickets, the person who meets you on the plane. You have this entire concept of the company, which is expressed through the type of people that they're hiring, Mr. Speaker. You have that benefit, and it changes the way you make your choices, which is why the business does. So why does this create a better and more well-informed recruitment process? 3 levels: staff, businesses, and customers. In terms of staff, 3 points. First of all, we say ugly people can find jobs better suited to them under our model, because what our model allows for is for companies to openly advertise what physical characteristics they can find. We say that ugly people will suffer under the companies when they get hired into the jobs which don't want them in the first place, Mr. Speaker. We say that you will create groups of companies that do want to hire people with different physical attributes, and it allows staff to easily choose which companies will better suit them. In terms of businesses, what we say is, first of all, it stops unconscious discrimination, because we think this discrimination does occur all the time. But what this does, it puts us on a talking point. It makes a company review their own policies and say, yes, this is something that we do value as a company, this is something that we don't, this is something that we look for, this is something that's not. It means that you're actively looking at physical appearance instead of letting it unconsciously go under the radar. What we say is, secondly, it creates a more objective policy in terms of a national policy can come down and say, we want to hire all blonde people or all brunette people, rather than subjective HR officers having their personal discriminations affecting the company. What we say thirdly is, it allows you to correctly identify what creates success. Because when you allow physical attractiveness to be a KPI, Mr. Speaker, it allows you to identify whether or not that did weigh into whether or not that person was more successful or not, rather than ignore it. And finally, we say that ethical businesses suffer under the status quo because of those pursuits. In terms of customers, we say this creates better informed customers, which means that they can choose which companies they want to support based on their policies. And it also means that a company is better able to communicate to their customers, because the physical appearance of their workers sends a message to their customers. For example, an elite gym has fit workers, whereas an inclusive gym has more inclusive types of bodies. So for all these reasons, we're proud to propose.
I thank Pete for his speech, and I call Kerrod to continue the case for the negative. Oh, fun, I get a theme song. Well, I would.
We thought we could have 2 moments in a row.
Doesn't like his theme song that much.
I told him train simulator.
Train simulator.
Shut up and let me talk. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, we're presented with an affirmative who wants to take us back to the 1950s, but essentially wants to tell us that this is a better approach that businesses should take. They think that by taking us back this far, this is going to be more efficient for businesses, that this is going to improve their profitability. We're presented with an affirmative who wants to tell us that an attitude of discrimination is going to improve business image to an already very self-aware society about issues of discrimination and about issues of body image, okay? We don't think that's the case. And thirdly, we've got an affirmative who wants to tell you that the more attractive and less skilled employees are going to improve efficiencies to business. I'm going to be bringing you 2 main points from the opposition tonight. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about the long-term negative effects that their model has on society and on individuals. And secondly, I'm going to be talking about the incredibly detrimental effects that their model has on the job market. But before I move into that, I'd like to discuss a few very many things that were wrong with the case presented by the opposition tonight. Now, firstly, we've been given these 2 very weak examples that, in fact, that Virgin are incredibly successful, because apparently people care more about flight attendants than where they're going when they're booking a flight, right? No, Virgin did not break into the successful airplane market simply because they offered hot flight attendants, okay? They broke in because they offered cheap fares, they offered efficient business, and they offered better operating that allowed them to afford those costs and overtake Qantas in that part. And then secondly, we've also been told that apparently people like going onto Facebook because Mark Zuckerberg is a nerd and people can better relate to him. No! People like going onto Facebook because it's reliable, because it's efficient, and because it is superiorly equipped over all of its other competitors. Alright, secondly, you've also heard that businesses should be allowed to have their own standards. Businesses should be permitted to have their own standards varying on whatever they want. Okay, first of all, this goes completely against the model they presented us, okay? Because by allowing businesses their own individual standards, you're essentially allowing discrimination not on the 2 market industries that they wanted to present you, which are like acting and modelling and stuff like that. You're allowing them to set standards across a broad variety of different markets and different jobs, and we think that's inherently wrong and that's inherently discriminatory, and I'll move on to that. No, thank you. and which will basically, and it's not the narrow market that they want you to believe. But secondly, they've told us, right, that looks do matter, and it's firmly our position on the affirmative, on the opposition tonight, that they shouldn't matter. And what should matter is how good and how meritorious a person is and how efficient they are at their job. And they've also told us that ugly people essentially should have to find jobs. No, thank you. That ugly people should have to find jobs. You had your time to speak. Other people should find jobs. Ugly people should find jobs that are better suited to them. I'm going to tell you in my first point of substantive why that is so harmful. But also, we think it's incredibly detrimental to take into account looks rather than a valid system such as education into account for certain professions, because essentially you have less educated people being considered, being placed higher above people who are more educated simply based on their looks. I'm going to be addressing that also in my substantive. So moving on, no thank you, moving on to my first substantive point, the long term of individuals. So why is this bad? Let me count the ways, okay? Judging a person's ability to perform a job on the shallow assessment of their looks is incredibly detrimental, not only to the job market, but also the broader esteem of society, okay? Because under their model, right, by taking the focus away from the talent and abilities, no thank you, and permitting people to take into account factors which are not unbiased and factors which are solely determined by how fortunate you are genetically, we believe that this essentially imbues in society that it doesn't matter how successful you are, it doesn't matter how hard you try, there's always a possibility that you are going to be, you can stay standing up, that you are always going to be at threat of not succeeding because someone more attractive and less skilled than you, less skilled than you, will be able to take that job over you, okay? And we think that's incredibly detrimental to teach people that no matter how hard they try, that more attractive people are always going to be more successful if they are at a similar level. Yes?
We've already told you, like, we never said that people with a 5.5 are going to get in over a 6.5. But if a business can identify that attractiveness will actually help their business and is an important factor, just as important as any other thing, why would that harm it?
Well, firstly, we don't think that businesses would actually, in the model that you propose to us, would actually take this risk, right? If they're struggling in this market of capitalism where they are cutthroat, right, they're not going to take a risk on those sorts of individuals, but we don't think that, we think it's inherently contradictory to suggest under your model that businesses should be able to preference less efficient, more attractive employees over more efficient and perhaps less stereotypically beautiful employees, and we don't think that that's an advantage for a business at all. Okay, so basically we say that by enforcing this, it's incredibly harmful for society because this enforces to individuals that your talent is to an extent irrelevant, okay? And you do not have a sufficient ability to achieve your goals. Now, no thank you. Now let's look at the broader context, because this doesn't only affect individuals and adults in the market, right? You're talking about the entire market, because as soon as you open the door and allow this and say it is acceptable for people to discriminate, okay, you're opening it up to the whole market, okay? And this is not just professionals, and this is not just adults, but we're talking about other markets too. We're talking about your 14-year-old working at McDonald's who also may be imbued at the young age that your attractiveness is relevant to how good you are at your job. We think this is incredibly detrimental to introduce this to not only the broader market, but also that market in particular, because essentially under your model, no thank you, you're essentially imbuing this sense of worth based on attractiveness at all levels, and we think that's incredibly harmful because you perpetuate from a young age that if you are not pretty, you are not successful, which I will address in my second point. But finally, we think by allowing this, and we think by allowing individuals to discriminate based on their looks, right, you're going to have less people who break this stereotypical molds being successful, which means you're going to have less role models for these individuals to look up to say, hey, I can succeed. And furthermore, you take away another crucial pillar to these people's self-belief, and you further detriment their self-belief and their self-confidence as a whole. No, thank you. Okay, so let's look at the long-term effects on the job market under the model they presented. So what happens when you saturate society at all levels that they cannot be successful without being attractive, when you remove these role models and when you remove their self-belief, right? When you disincentivize people to chase their goals because they believe, because of their lowered self-esteem, that they are not good enough, you essentially create an even worse and more depleted job market because not a lot of people outwardly perceive themselves as attractive. Majority of people have self-esteem issues, so not a lot of people will outwardly have the confidence to believe that they are an attractive person and that they can follow the requisite job or the requisite career path that they want to. And when you enforce this across the level, in adults, in children, you not only when you enforce this at an adult level, at a child level, across the entire job market, right, you get people who do not undertake tertiary education. You get people who do not go for the job that they want to pursue because they believe that it's just going to be a waste of time because they're always going to be pipped by a more attractive person with a similar level of education. So what happens when you enforce this disincentivization that unattractive people can't get jobs, right? You have less people who are graduating, you have less people going for those jobs because they don't believe that they can get those. And then as a result, you have perhaps more attractive people, but less skilled individuals applying for these jobs, and you have a greatly depleted market where the best people are not available or don't believe that they can take those jobs, which is less efficient to business because you have less educated people, less efficient employees, but more attractive employees running your business, which is apparently going to improve your profitability. So because on the opposition, we believe that jobs should be given on merit, because we believe in more efficient employees, and because we believe in the success of businesses, we are proud to oppose this model.
I'd like to thank Kerrod for his speech and call on Duggan to finish the...
More!
Ready? All good, Josh?
We're good. You're at an odd angle.
Sorry.
I can do this.
Mr. Speaker, we find it interesting that the affirmative team, their case consisted of the idea that companies will suffer if they don't have attractive people. Yet when we asked them for an example of this, all they could give us was Qantas does not get as many flights as Virgin. Mr. Speaker, the reason for this isn't because there are unattractive flight attendants. It is because it is cheaper to get flights on Virgin and Jetstar instead. The reason they could never give us an example for a company failing because of unattractive employees is because it has never happened, right? Under the status quo, it has never happened. So why does it need to change? 3 things on this tonight, Mr. Speaker. So, firstly, should companies have the right to discriminate based on looks? Secondly, the effects on companies. And thirdly, looking at the effects on society, something they were quite happy to send crashing into the ground. So, firstly, should companies have the right to discriminate based on looks? Does this already happen? Mr. Speaker, the affirmative team gave you a couple of examples of discrimination that already happened. They gave you pilots, police, army, people who can't have someone in because they have not got accurate eyesight. The reason for that is because it harms those people to enter into those industries. They could never give you an example of an unattractive person being harmed by being in an industry because it doesn't happen, right?
What information?
No. What we say is that we think that these laws exist for a reason. We think we're quite happy to continue standing for that, but that it completely contradicts what they're trying to stand for tonight. We heard about how ethical companies are harmed at the moment because if they're not choosing based for appearance and other companies are, then they're the ones being harmed by it. Mr. Speaker, what we think is that there are regulations against discrimination and we're quite happy for those to stand. Under their model, you may take away unconscious discrimination. You introduce conscious discrimination, right? You take away the potential for you to actually force these companies to own up to the fact that they are judging based on appearance, which is something we don't stand for. I'll be telling you exactly why. You introduce the potential for them to judge on this. Once you introduce that potential, you then say to them, if you're a company trying to promote a Caucasian ideal, you completely have the right to not hire someone because they're black. This is what we're talking about with minorities. The moment you say to a company, you can judge a company employee or a person who wants to get into that company just for the fact of what your company is trying to promote, you introduce all areas of discrimination. They didn't want to answer to that because they know it's a slippery slope that they're going down under their model. Shame on them. What we say is that the societal majority is not perfect. These companies actually lose the ability to connect to the societal majority under their model, which is something we think is very important. I'll be getting to that shortly. So, should companies have the right to choose? Mr. Speaker, don't get us wrong. We believe the companies have the right to choose. We believe they have the right to choose based on a person's skill set, based on a person's qualifications, based on whether or not that person is actually good for their company. We don't think that companies have a right to superficially choose based on who might be the prettiest on their company. I'll take that in a moment. When this shouldn't be allowed is when it benefits their own agenda, when you allow company officials to say like, hey, I think that person is pretty, let's hire her so I can stare at her daily. We think that is incredibly harmful for those companies and to the wider society. Go.
You just said that people should hire on the basis that what their employees bring to the business. If someone brings to the business their attractiveness and this directly benefits the business, shouldn't they have the right to do so?
No, because what we say is that business should never depend on like what is entirely attractive for that business. You brought up like actors and modelling. We don't think that like models and actors should be solely based on why they're the prettiest, because we think the societal standards of what is pretty should change. You never told us why it should actually change. Like we said that we're quite happy for overweight actresses to get into that field. Like we don't think this is a bad thing. Instead, all you told us is that like this is societal standard of beauty. This is what we should be matching up to. We think that should change. That's what we think is happening. I'll get to that shortly. What we say is that like businesses, you talked about the idea that businesses are going to choose based on packages. The moment you introduce potential for them to judge based on appearance, they're going to throw everything out the window because they're not going to care about anything else. Why is this harmful to the business? Bringing this on to my second point. So what we say is that a business who based on appearance does not appeal to the majority anyway. Mr. Speaker, what we see is that there are things changing in society at the moment. We see that we're introducing like mannequins who might not be fit to a size 6 because they recognise that the consumers out there do not fit into that stereotype. We say this is an incredibly good thing because it tells society that like it is okay to be different. It is okay to be like what you are. You shouldn't have to fit into what society thinks you should be. Under your model, like you introduce an idea of perfection with these companies. You show people that they have to match that standard. Incredibly harmful when they don't. Why is that bad? Because a customer who's like doesn't match that under your model is never going to be like actively buying into that. So they're actually going to harm the companies in general. How this affects the job market. So Doug told you that like ugly people can go to where their skills will be best suited because they're not the most attractive. Mr. Speaker, you are forcing people who are not like completely attractive into these jobs because they're not going to be getting into the ones whereby you're going to have a more attractive candidate. You essentially tell them that the only job where they will ever be able to succeed is one where their appearance doesn't matter, which brings me quite nicely to my third point about effects on society. So why this is bad to the people who are not being hired. Mr. Speaker, you're essentially telling them like, hey, you are not pretty enough. We have another candidate who happens to be like hotter than you are. Therefore, go find another job. Let's think for a moment about like the damage it does to that person's self-esteem. You essentially tell them none of your qualifications matter. None of the work that you've done no longer matters. You essentially tell them like based on your appearance, you are not going to be able to ever succeed in that field. You force them to go into a job that they might not want to enter into, but they now have to enter into because these jobs are not going to be based on their appearance. Like that is incredibly harmful for those people. What we say is that like these people are going to be constantly chasing for an idea of perfection that you promote under your model, and they're never going to get right because they're never going to be able to change the way they look. No matter how much a person loses weight, they're always going to want to lose more weight. You should be promoting this idea, and we think society is moving towards changing this idea of what is normal and what is perfect, and this idea of like promoting that you should be happy with your own body. We think that's an incredibly good thing. Moving finally on to the message it sends to younger generations. Kerrod brought this up, it wasn't really engaged with. What you do by telling a child that when they grow up, they are going to be judged on their appearance, like that they will not get into a job unless they actually are attractive enough for that job. You essentially drill this into younger generations and therefore drill this into like the next sort of people who are growing up into society. That appearance is all that matters. We think this is the most harmful thing you can do because you tell the next generation down that like appearance is the only thing that matters. You can say all you want, like looks do matter, but that's not something we're happy with. We're quite happy for it to change, and we think that it is beginning to. It's something you take away under your model. So, Mr. Speaker, because unattractive people should have jobs, and we're quite happy to stand for that right today, we are very proud to oppose.